On May 6, 1937, Hindenburg, the German commercial rigid airship, burst into flames as it was attempting to land at the Naval Air Station in Lakehurst, New Jersey. The death of 36 people and the fact that the disaster was one of the first major catastrophes caught on camera effectively ended the era of airship travel. Although there were multiple airships throughout history, the Zeppelin remains the most famous one. So, how did one of the most promising methods of air travel go from having a bright future to an abrupt end? You're watching The Dig, and this is the history of the Zeppelins. It all started in 1874, when Ferdinand von Zeppelin became fascinated with the prospect of air travel by an airship, following a lecture given by Heinrich von Steuben, a general post director for the German Empire who reorganized its post service. Von Steuben proposed the idea of using a, quote, large rigidly framed outer envelope containing several separate gas bags, end quote, by which post could be distributed. Von Steuben's idea was inspired by Union Army balloons he saw while visiting the United States during the American Civil War. It wouldn't be until von Zeppelin's retirement from the Army in 1890 that he began seriously pursuing the project of designing and building the world's first rigid airship to not only distribute the post, but to also serve as means of travel. It's interesting to note that although the Zeppelin became the most famous of all airships, it wasn't the first airship ever built. In fact, the first powered airship was built back in 1852 by Henri Giffard, and in 1884, the French military airship La France used an electric motor for the first time. Still, von Zeppelin's design was something entirely different. Though they look the same, von Zeppelin's airship was different in many ways. To start off, its framework was made from aluminum, keeping it both sturdy and lightweight. Previous airships were entirely filled with gas to maintain their shape and allow for lifting, but von Zeppelin's creation allowed for the metal skeleton to support the structure, while separate gas cells inside provided lift. Thanks to its rigid outer shell, a Zeppelin could be significantly bigger, allowing for more passengers, cargo, and fuel on board. Funding was difficult to come by, so in 1898, von Zeppelin founded the Society for the Promotion of Airship Flight, and personally, alongside other investors, contributed to it with around $10 million in today's money. This allowed for the construction of the first Zeppelin, the LZ-1. LZ stood for Luftschiff Zeppelin, or Zeppelin airship. On July 2, 1900, LZ-1 took its first flight over Lake Constance, suffering some damage during landing, but bettering the velocity attained by La France in two later flights made in October of the same year. Still, shareholders refused to invest more money, so the society was liquidated and the airship dismantled in 1901. But von Zeppelin's dreams weren't shattered. Thanks to donations, special lottery, public funding, and a personal contribution, von Zeppelin was able to build the LZ-2, which flew only once in early 1906, due to both engines failing and a damaged anchor ship beyond repair. And yet, von Zeppelin wasn't giving up. The LZ-3 was the first truly successful Zeppelin, and by the time World War I started, von Zeppelin founded the Zeppelin Company, which manufactured 21 more airships and even sold 2 to the Imperial German Army. The success of the company generated immense public interest, and following the founding of DLAG, the German Airship Travel Corporation, in 1909, which became the world's first airline, Zeppelins became a popular but expensive travel method between German cities. With the breakout of World War I, Zeppelins went from passenger airships to military ones, serving for bombings, long-range surveillance, and naval patrols. In May 1915, the first out of roughly 20 Zeppelins bombed London. signaling the start of strategic aerial bombings that aimed to destroy civilian infrastructure and contribute to wartime paranoia. Paris, Antwerp, and Edinburgh were just some of the cities bombed by German Zeppelins, proving these massive airships were capable of inflicting a lot of damage when used for war strategy. Zeppelins also proved useful for enemy surveillance, thanks to the fact that they flew at high altitudes and were airborne for hours on end. Zeppelins were a great solution for observing troop movements, naval fleets, and shipping routes. In addition, throughout the entirety of the war, Zeppelins were also crucial for performing naval patrols over the North and Baltic Sea. In fact, patrolling had priority over any other airship activity. Thanks to their patrolling duty, they prevented British ships from approaching Germany, would spot where the British were laying mines, and contributed to destroying those same mines. As the end of the war was approaching, military Zeppelins became more obsolete. By 1918, airplanes had surpassed Zeppelins in speed, maneuverability, and usefulness, so these magnificent airships were slowly sidelined. Following the Treaty of Versailles of 1919, most military Zeppelins were confiscated, making many believe the era of airship dominance was over. However, that was entirely false. By 1920, the Zeppelin Company was already working on reinventing their brand. Now focused on building civilian airships, the company's biggest turning point came in 1924, when the LZ-126 was built for the United States as part of war reparations. After arriving in America, it became part of the U.S. Navy as USS Los Angeles, proving as an enormous success and showcasing the German government there was a lot of commercial potential for passenger airships. And with the arrival of the LZ-127 Graf Zeppelin, the Zeppelin Renaissance began. For the next 9 years, between 1928 and 1937, Zeppelins represented the pinnacle of luxury air travel and carried people from Europe to North America on a regular basis, proving transcontinental passenger air travel was possible long before modern airlines started offering the service. What made Zeppelins so special was their interior design. Private sleeping cabins, elegant dining rooms, lounges, and panoramic windows allowed for an extremely comfortable voyage, closely resembling that of a ship. The ticket prices for a trip aboard a Zeppelin were very appropriate for the type of service one would receive on board. A round-trip ticket in the 1930s cost roughly $720, or close to $17,000 today. In 9 years, the Graf Zeppelin would complete 590 flights, carry more than 13,000 passengers, fly over 1 million miles or 1.7 million kilometers, cross the Atlantic over 140 times, and circumnavigate the globe in 1929. For almost a decade, thanks to its spotless record of flights, the Graf Zeppelin was considered as the safest airship ever built, thanks to its experienced crews, strict maintenance, and engineering improvements. Everything would change, however, with the arrival of Hindenburg in 1936. The world was seriously changing by the 1930s, and with the arrival of Nazi leadership in Germany in 1933, Zeppelins became a big part of the Nazi propaganda. Sporting swastikas on the tail fins was now a standard sight, and both the Graf Zeppelin and Hindenburg took part in the quote-unquote Flight for Germany in March of 1936. Considered as one of the most spectacular displays of propaganda of the 1930s, the Flight for Germany saw the two Zeppelins fly above a number of German cities, drop millions of Nazi leaflets, blast patriotic music through loudspeakers, and urge people to vote in the referendum to approve the remilitarization of the Rhineland. Although still a popular travel option, Zeppelins were already facing serious competition from airplanes. now a faster and more affordable means of travel. Following the Hindenburg disaster just a year later, Zeppelins would slowly but surely become obsolete. So, why did the Hindenburg explode in the first place? To answer that, we need to understand the physics behind airships. So, the rigid outer shell of a Zeppelin was made of aluminum, making them both lightweight and sturdy. In order to obtain liftoff and progressively lift throughout its journey, certain portions of the Zeppelin's interior were reserved for the so-called gas cells. Although there was some experimentation with coal gas in the late 19th century, the primary gas used was hydrogen. Although it allowed for the greatest lift and was relatively cheap, hydrogen had one fatal flaw. It was highly flammable, and it could create an explosive mixture if it mixed with oxygen. This is the precise reason why, from the 1920s onwards, most airships, especially those produced in the US, were built with helium as its primary gas in mind. As a chemically inert and a completely non-flammable gas, helium was considered the safest option for airships, and even Hindenburg was designed with helium in mind. So, why was Hindenburg still using hydrogen when it was supposed to use helium? First and foremost, up until the 1940s, the US was by far the biggest primary producer of helium, thanks to helium-rich natural gas fields found in Texas, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Obtaining helium without importing it from the States was extremely hard, so with the arrival of Nazi leadership in Germany, diplomatic relations between the United States and Germany became frosty, causing the US government to refuse to export helium to the Third Reich. Therefore, hydrogen remained the least expensive and most attainable gas for airship use in Germany. And so, though the exact cause of the explosion was never officially confirmed, it's believed the Hindenburg likely exploded due to a hydrogen leak that turned into a fireball after the airship traveled for hours on end through rain and storm clouds, causing it to become electrically charged. It's important to mention that Hindenburg wasn't the only airship to ever explode due to a hydrogen-related issue. In fact, at least 23 hydrogen airships were destroyed by fires between 1908 and 1930. Still, the Hindenburg is best known because it was caught on camera as it happened, broadcasting the images of a burning airship to millions across the globe. Following the Hindenburg disaster, Zeppelins progressively became an obsolete relic of a bygone era. Although the Graf Zeppelin II LZ-130 was built in 1938, the sister ship to the Hindenburg was eventually dismantled in 1940 on orders of Hermann Goering. Interestingly, the Zeppelin company, unlike their airships, didn't disappear. Instead, following World War II, the company shifted its focus towards engineering and industrial technology. It continues to exist today. Although original Zeppelins disappeared by the 1940s, a daughter enterprise of the Zeppelin conglomerate that built the original German Zeppelins has been developing Zeppelin new technology anti-airships since the 1990s. Designed for sightseeing, advertising, and research, modern-day Zeppelins are semi-rigid and much smaller, but still a sight to behold whenever they appear. The Goodyear's blimps are among the best-known examples of contemporary Zeppelins. A revolutionary idea that struggled to take off for some time, Zeppelins would go on to define air travel in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. Remarkably reliable, extremely luxurious, and insanely pricey, Zeppelins were also a symbol of the upper class, able to afford a one-way ticket that costs up to $9,000 today. Still, these magnificent giants remain a relic of a bygone era, one defined by war and instability. Although the Hindenburg and its disaster nowadays remain at the center of interest for the history of Zeppelins, The entire trajectory of how the idea even came to be to the golden era of these air beasts is a remarkable one. An idea born back in the late 19th century transformed into one of the most luxurious and expensive travel methods of the 20th century, proving both von Zeppelin and von Steuben were ahead of their time. Modern-day Zeppelins might be the best way to experience what it was like traveling aboard an airship, but they're just a shell of what real Zeppelins used to be. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more niche and uncharted history topics that are yet to be covered. Until next time, diggers.